Elena always said that silence was peaceful, but she didn't know how loud silence could be until that Tuesday in October. Julian had only asked for 5 minutes to take one last photograph of the valley. She watched him walk toward the ridge, his silhouette blending into the gray mist of the She looked down at her phone to check a text. When she looked up, the ridge was empty. No sound of falling rocks. No cry for help. Just the wind moving through the ancient spruce trees. She didn't know it then, but she had just spent her last moment with him. The Great Smoky Mountains have a way of holding on to time. The locals say that if you stand still enough in these woods, you can hear the breathing of the earth itself. It is a place of immense beauty, ancient roots, and secrets that are buried deep beneath the layers of decaying leaves and moss. For Julian and Elena, the mountains were not a place of fear, but a sanctuary. They had met in Tennessee, two souls who found quiet comfort in the presence of the other. Julian was an artist, a man who saw the world through the lens of his vintage camera, always chasing the perfect light. Elena was the anchor, the one who kept their lives tethered to reality while Julian's mind drifted into the clouds. They had been married for 7 years. 7 years of coffee in the morning, shared books in the evening, and the kind of love that doesn't need words to be understood. They decided to celebrate their anniversary with a drive through the park. It was mid-October, the time of year when the Appalachians set themselves on fire with color. The maples were burning red, the oaks were turning a deep, rusted gold, and the air smelled of crisp pine and incoming rain. They drove the winding roads of Newfound Gap, the windows down, letting the cold mountain air fill the car. Julian was in high spirits, pointing out the way the light hit the ridges, talking about how the shadows looked like spilled ink on the valley floor. They parked the car near a lesser-known trailhead. It wasn't a major hiking destination, just a quiet pull-off where the woods seemed to open up slightly. They didn't plan on hiking far. Just a short walk to stretch their legs and drink the coffee they had brought in a thermos. The atmosphere was perfect. It was one of those days where the sky is a piercing blue, contrasting sharply with the dark green of the hemlocks. But there is a duality to the Smokies. As beautiful as they are dense. The undergrowth is thick, a tangle of rhododendron that can swallow a person whole. They walked hand in hand for about 20 minutes. The trail was soft under their boots, dampened by a light rain from the night before. They talked about their future, about buying a house with a porch where they could watch the sunset. They talked about children, a conversation they had been hesitant to have until now. Julian stopped to tie his shoe. He looked up at Elena, his eyes catching the sunlight filtering through the canopy. He told her he had never been happier. It is a cruel trick of fate that the moments of purest joy are often the ones that precede the darkest falls. As they turned back toward the car, the weather began to shift. This is common in these mountains. The blue sky was rapidly being consumed by a rolling bank of gray fog. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a matter of minutes. Julian spotted a ridge just off the trail. It was a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the valley below, which was now filling with the thick, white mist. He grabbed his camera bag, his eyes lighting up with that familiar artistic obsession. "I need to get the shot, El," he said, pointing to the ridge. "The way the fog is eating the trees, ... It's perfect. Just give me 5 minutes." Elena laughed, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. 5 minutes, Julian? I'm getting cold." She watched him walk away. He moved easily through the brush, his flannel shirt a beacon of red against the darkening woods. She saw him reach the edge of the ridge. He turned back once, waved at her, and raised his camera to his eye. Elena turned away to lean against a tree. She checked her watch. It was 3:14 p.m. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the wind picking up. The sound of the forest changed. The birds stopped singing, replaced by the rustle of dry leaves. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Elena looked back toward the ridge. The fog had thickened substantially, swirling around the trees like a living thing. She couldn't see the red of his shirt anymore. She felt a small prickle of annoyance. "Julian," she called out, her voice sounding flat in the heavy air. "Time's up. Let's go." She expected to hear his footsteps crunching back toward her. She expected his laugh, an apology for losing track of time. But there was no answer. Just the wind. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against her ears. She waited another minute, her annoyance slowly curdling into unease. She pushed off the tree and walked toward where he had entered the brush. "Julian!" she called again, louder this time. "Stop playing around. It's freezing." She reached the rocky outcropping where he had been standing. The view was completely obscured by white mist. You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. The rock was empty. There was no sign of him. No camera lens cap dropped on the ground. No footprints in the moss. It was as if he had simply dissolved into the air. The human brain struggles to process sudden absence. For the first few minutes, Elena wasn't scared. She was confused. She assumed he had walked further down the ridge to get a better angle. She assumed he was just out of earshot. She began to walk in widening circles, pushing through the thick rhododendron bushes. The branches scratched at her face and hands, but she didn't feel it. "Julian, answer me. S'escrime. Escrime." The panic began to rise in her chest, a cold, hard knot. 10 minutes became 20. The fog was now so thick that the trees looked like ghosts. The light was fading fast. In the mountains, twilight comes early, and it comes quickly. The shadows stretched out, turning the friendly woods into something menacing. She dialed his phone. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again. Each time, his cheerful recorded greeting mocked her. "Hey, this is Julian. Leave a message." She left 3 messages, her voice going from irritated to terrified. She ran back to the trail, thinking maybe he had circled back to the car. She sprinted the 20 minutes back to the parking lot, her breath tearing at her throat. The car was there, empty. A layer of condensation had already formed on the windshield. He wasn't there. She stood alone in the empty parking lot, the vastness of the wilderness surrounding her. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He is gone. She scrambled for her keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice. She drove to the nearest ranger station, speeding around the curves, risking her own life to save his. When she burst into the station, she was hysterical, breathless, tears streaming down her face covered in dirt. The rangers were professional, but she could see the concern in their eyes when she described the weather. Night had fallen. A search in the dark, in the fog, in that terrain, was nearly impossible. But they tried. Within 2 hours, flashlights were cutting through the darkness. Men and women in uniform moved methodically through the woods. They called his name. "Julian? Julian Cross." The sound echoed off the valley walls, but the only response was the hoot of an owl. Elena sat in the back of a ranger truck, wrapped in a shock blanket. She stared into the black wall of the forest. She kept waiting for him to walk out, embarrassed and cold. She kept waiting for the nightmare to end. The first night is the hardest, they say. But for Elena, every night that followed was harder. The search lasted for 10 days. It was one of the largest search operations the park had seen in years. Dogs, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers, but the mountains refused to give him up. The heavy rain on the second day washed away any scent the dogs might have tracked. The fog made the helicopters useless for the first crucial 48 hours. Elena didn't leave the park. She slept in her car or on a cot in the command center. She studied the maps until her eyes blurred. She blamed herself. Why didn't she go with him? Why didn't she call him back sooner? On the 10th day, the official search was suspended. The incident commander, a kind man with tired eyes, sat her down. He told her the probability of survival without gear in these temperatures was 0. They were no longer looking for a rescue. They were looking for a recovery. Elena returned to their home. But it wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of a life that had been interrupted. His coffee mug was still on the counter. His unfinished painting was on the easel. His scent was on the pillows. She couldn't touch anything. To move an object felt like admitting he wasn't coming back to use it. She kept his phone line active, paying the bill every month just to hear his voicemail, terrified that one day the number would be reassigned. Weeks turned into months. Winter came, burying the Smokies in snow. Elena imagined him out there, under the white blanket. The thought was agony, but she couldn't stop it. She became a ghost in her own life, going through the motions of working and eating. Her friends tried to comfort her, but they didn't understand. They had funerals, they had bodies to bury, they had closure. Elena had nothing but a void. She had a question mark where the end of her story should be. She became obsessed with the Appalachian folklore. She read about the moon-eyed people, about the spirits that lured travelers off the path. She wondered if the mountains had taken him because he loved them too much. It was irrational, but grief is not rational. First anniversary. Second anniversary. The world moved on. New mysteries happened. New tragedies appeared on the news. But for Elena, it was always that Tuesday in October. She was always standing by the tree, waiting for him to come back from the fog. 5 years passed. Elena had slowly begun to function again. She didn't heal. Don't heal from an amputation, but she learned to walk with the limp. She started painting again, using his old supplies. It was her way of speaking to him. One afternoon, she received a call from the Park Service. The voice on the other end was hesitant. "Mrs. Cross, we need you to come in. A hiker found something off-trail near Klingman's Dome. It's miles from where you were, but we think it's his." The drive to the station felt like traveling back in time. Her heart hammered against her ribs. When she walked into the office, the ranger placed a plastic bag on the table. Inside was a camera. A vintage model, Julian's camera. The leather strap was rotted, and the metal was corroded. But she knew it instantly. "Where was he?" she whispered. The ranger looked down. "We only found the bag and the camera, ma'am, wedged in a rock crevice. It looks like he tried to protect it from the rain." There were no remains. The animals and the elements had done their work. But the camera was sealed. The film inside was old, degraded. But the lab experts said there might be a chance to salvage the last images. Elena waited 3 days for the photos. Those 3 days were an eternity. What would she see? Horror, fear. The blurry ground of a man running for his life. She terrified herself with the possibilities. When the envelope arrived, she sat on the floor, her hands trembling. She pulled out the glossy prints. Most were black, destroyed by water and time. But the last one had survived. It was a photo of the fog, but through the mist, there was a break in the clouds. A single ray of golden sunlight was hitting a small wildflower growing out of a rock. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. The angle of the shot was low. He must have been sitting down when he took it. There was no blur of panic. The focus was perfect. It was the work of an artist who saw beauty even in his final moments. Elena realized then that Julian hadn't died in terror. He had gotten lost. Yes, the hypothermia likely set in, bringing with it that strange final lethargy. He had sat down to rest, saw something beautiful, and captured it. He died doing exactly what he loved. The mountains hadn't taken him maliciously. They had just kept him. He was part of the forest now. His atoms were in the soil, in the roots of the wildflowers, in the mist that rolled over the ridges. Elena returned to the spot where the camera was found. It was deep in the wilderness, a place of quiet majesty. She didn't bring flowers. Instead, she brought his favorite lens. She buried it in the soft earth, marking the spot with a simple stone. She stood up and looked out over the endless waves of blue mountains. The wind kicked up, rustling the trees. For the first time in 5 years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like a conversation. "I saw the picture, Julian," she whispered to the wind. "It was perfect." She turned and walked back toward the trail. She was still alone, but she was no longer waiting. The mystery wasn't solved in the way the police wanted, but her heart had found its answer. He was not missing. He was exactly where he always wanted to be. The Appalachian Mountains keep their secrets, wrapping them in fog and shadow. But sometimes, if you listen closely to the quiet, they will tell you a story of love that not even the wild could destroy.